Bonnie, I just need to know in the end, can I sit at your right hand?
Always, always. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are Irenicast, a group of folks leaning into our progressive Christian imagination. I'm Bonnie.
I'm Casey.
This is Rajiv.
And I'm Jeff.
On the first and third Tuesday of every month,
We provoke conversation for shifting perspectives
On theology and culture.
Thank you for joining us. This week, we are finishing our series of Beyond the Binary of Deconstruction and Reconstruction. And so we're going to try our best to not only wrap things up, but also offer maybe some resources and some other thoughts about what all this, what is deconstruction and reconstruction. And then for our segment, we are going to play a game called Two Truths and a Lie, the Community Edition. So this game will be fun. I think we've played this before, but you can tell how much I love games. So look forward to that after this episode. And so for this episode, we're going to talk about community and the role that community plays in this process and the beyond the binary process of deconstruction and reconstruction. All of us have talked about how at no point in the journey, even though we felt deeply alone at times and it felt like such a solitary experience, that really at no time were we completely cut off or disconnected from other people. That community was a part of it. So this episode is a chance for us to reflect on that a little bit and then offer maybe some resources and insights that we hope might be helpful to you in your journey. So let's start off by just answering the question, how do you, when you think of community, what does that mean to you?
I think for a lot of people listening and for us, like the first thing is church, right? And I think that kind of at the top to say that, when we're talking community, we're not saying, here are some tips on how you can go back to church. You don't ever have to go back to church. That's not what we're saying here. We're saying people that are walking alongside of you. And you may have had that in church or not, but that's kind of what we're talking about when we say community. And I think that needs to be said up front. I think when we get to the reconstruction mode, so many times we talk about like going back to things.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to be a reality either. Like you don't have to go back to things. You can leave things behind for good. Communities, churches, whatever. So, to answer the question explicitly, that you're asking, Bonnie, I would say just, people you can confide in, people who you're not afraid to, to use verbiage from our last episode, reveal your authentic self to.
We had a visitor. I mean, Jeff, you were just talking about church. So here I am bringing in church again, not because, but it's relevant. But Reverend Rosemary McCombs Maxey was the first Native woman ordained in the United Church of Christ, and she came to visit. She's really good friends with a member of ours, and I got to be in a small group discussion with her and was asking her, how do we move forward into what's next as a human species? And we were specifically talking about masculinity. And she thought for a second, and then she said, friendship. Be a good friend and surround yourself with good friends. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we know what that means deep down. It's a deep answer. And I think that's the key. And we sometimes find those friendships in family, actually biological relations. Sometimes we create chosen family. Sometimes it's an outgrowth of a workplace or, I don't know, an affinity group. Sometimes it's in church or mosque or temple. But friendship.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, in friendship, there is love, right? I like to say that I define love as always working for the good of the other. There are places that I go, or other people, where they go places, and even they may not be friends, but you are looking after one another. The community is tending to the people, right? And I think that that's really important. I don't have to know you to care for you, to work for your good, to make sure that you get home safely. I mean, there have been many nights when I'm at gay bars and, not to be stereotypical, but there's the young straight woman in the corner who's drunk as hell by herself and just needs someone to call her a lift and get her home. I've done that. It's that tending to or looking after the good of the group, the making sure that the space is safe and you are authentically yourself. Your authentic self is welcomed, it is seen and celebrated, and you are safe.
Yeah, I think, those are really helpful definitions and ways of talking about community. As we were preparing for this episode, we came up with a few questions that we thought might be useful for helping us think about who is our community, what is community in our life, what role does it play in our life. And I think often we think of ourselves as, we receive from community. And maybe that's because we're in such need to receive from community when previously your worth and your value is measured by how much you gave to community, and you didn't get to ask any questions about whether or not you were getting anything in return, right? And yet community really is this give and take relationship. Community doesn't happen unless people are committed to fostering that sense of connection and safety and being able to be our true authentic selves. It takes work to foster that. And also, we need to be receiving from it too, because we deeply need to be connected. Yeah, so some of these questions, and I'd love to hear what you think about these questions as one way to think about what is community in my life? Who is responsible for you? Who are you responsible for? And who are you responsible to? Are those good guiding questions? Do you like that word responsible?
Yeah, I do. And I think, for me, what feels important to acknowledge is when I hear those questions, some aspects of brokenness come up. Because the notion of who is responsible for you, most of us are like, well, I can take care of myself, blah, blah, blah. There's brokenness in that. But inversely, there's something about that self-reliance that also makes us really selfish. And communities fail when there aren't more people giving than there are folks getting at any given time. So a lot of the times we gauge our feelings or our ratings of a community based on what we got. We rarely consider, what am I giving? What am I called to give to keep this community strong and afloat in whatever realm that's in? So it's just this strange sense of brokenness on multiple levels that is informing some of these considerations and underscoring the importance and necessity of good, healthy, loving community, because that's the only thing that'll get us through.
I never really thought of that, Rajiv, and I think it's really important for us to lift up this idea of when we hear who is responsible for you, and our first response is, ain't nobody responsible for me but me, right? I mean, I could hear myself immediately go to that place. And that's from a place of guardedness, right? A place of pain, a place of not trusting that the community can hold me, or not wanting to make myself vulnerable in that way. So I think it's very important to hear you say that a part of the way in which community is made whole is when we're willing to bring our whole selves and allow for ourselves to be vulnerable, allow ourselves to be tended to, and not to be the ones that drain the system either, right? That there has to be that give and that take, but to recognize that for the community, the beloved community, whatever that community is, you have to be willing to show up and allow yourself to be tended to. I think that's super important. I never thought of that until now. So thank you. I think that I notice that we're hesitant to answer the questions. And I don't know what that's about, but I sense in us this, and maybe this is good modeling, right, for our friends who listen to us, because there is a struggle to name who is responsible for me, right? I would say my husband feels some responsibility to me. I know my dog does probably. I can list who I'm responsible for a lot easier than I can say who might feel responsible for me. I'll just give a shout out to my gracious husband, who I know feels some responsibility for me. Maybe my parents, I don't know, grandparents. How does that work? I'm not sure, but I certainly feel responsible to my husband. I am responsible for my community, right? My church that I serve, my friends, the people that I love and care for. I feel responsible to you as colleagues and close friends. I feel responsible for, just in general, I feel like being a citizen of the community I'm a part of. More and more, I feel a sense of responsibility to take up space and to get clear about the values I think that I want to see manifested in our community. And who am I responsible to? All of those people. I think that's the thing, that give and that take piece, that I feel responsible to you, but I am also responsible to be held accountable by you. I think accountability, as hard as that word is for me to say, because for many of us, we had accountability buddies, right? Or whatever. There was a sense of shame attached to that. I don't think there has to be, but there is a sense of accountability, in the sense of, if I feel some sort of responsibility to you, I also know that you are inviting me to show up in ways that I need to be accountable for. I think that I am responsible to most of the people in which I am sharing love with. I'm investing time in.
Thank you, Casey, for breaking that ice.
Yeah, that was like really hard. And I'm sure that you all will say smarter things, and I'll be like, oh yeah, that too. But at least we started someplace.
Yeah, that was great. And I think too, like, as many times as you said the word responsible, that's the word. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly how we came to that word as we were brainstorming, but it's a heavy word.
Yeah.
And I think we, on the one hand, really do want to claim responsibility for ourselves and for those that we feel responsible for and to. And on the other hand, it's, it's like, that's too much.
Right.
We're
all oldest children, right?
Are we?
I think so.
That's probably how we ended up with this word.
I wanted to name that, bring that into the space.
That's a really important family dynamic.
That we are all oldest children. And so that word responsibility, I know for each of us, is something we take pretty seriously. At least I do. And it's just something to name.
Good point.
And in an ideal scenario, all the people, the self and everyone included, it's supposed to flow both ways, with the recognition that our developmental journeys are part of it. In the last episode, we talked about adolescence and how in that adolescent period, you're supposed to be selfish. And in families, where I see this showing up sometimes is we try to have family dinners pretty regularly. And if somebody's sort of in that adolescent thing and they don't we're like, just come eat and leave, go do whatever. They're not going to be able to necessarily prepare something in that time. But 5 years from now, they might be convening the whole thing. Ideally, it's supposed to flow. Ideally, we're supposed to be able to consider one another's developmental status or circumstantial status and provide for that. The tragedy is few of us are dealing with ideals, and we're trying to piece together the best we can. And so, Casey, just to sort of follow your lead, I resonated with everything you said, and I feel really, really lucky that I would add in that who is responsible for you are my parents. My parents have done a remarkable job making sure I know that. As long as they're alive, I'm like, I got them. They have my back, even though I don't need them in tangible financial ways anymore. They're there. And it's really nice to not have that be a question. And I know that's rare, and I'm just grateful for it. So I wanted to lift it up. I hope to do that for my kids, where they never have that doubt.
I mean, yes, they're tough questions. I think that's an interesting revelation about us all being older siblings, because that explains so much.
So much.
But I also think it's like difficult because, and maybe this is just my experience or my warped perspective, but communities seem to rarely be centered around people, but something. Right? Like even church, it was centered around your theology. Like it was centered around the thing that if you separated from, then you are also separating from the community. Family, same thing. Like it's that the family is a center. Even us at this table, like we're not here because we just magically met each other and we were friends first. Like we're centered around creating a podcast and work from that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then even those of you that may be listening, like we know based off of emails we get, there are many of you that feel like you're at this table with us that we don't even know you exist. And I don't mean to say that in like a, that sounds horrible to say, but it's also this really weird reality that we live in, is that we have seen and we've heard stories of people creating community from the words that we say into these microphones that we are totally not connected to in any way. So then when we get the word responsible, I mean, obviously I think all of us take a certain amount of responsibility for what we do on the show and the things that we say and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like there's also so many like communities that are based off of content, like in this space. I'm fumbling over my words here because I'm just trying to think like, I guess just personally thinking like, where is my community and where does my responsibility lie with these varying degrees of community? Is community a spectrum in terms of how much you could possibly give and not give? I don't know. I think I'm just kind of throwing stuff out there because I number one, avoiding the question, and number two, trying to like kind of sift through like who am I responsible for? I think of the faces that are in front of me, but then I also think of this microphone in front of me and
Mm-hmm.
what we're putting out there.
I think it's like such a big question, how we relate to the idea of community right now, especially. I have this conversation with young people all the time. Anybody in youth ministry or with children in your home, you may be having these questions because even the term like friends, friendship, followers, right? There's all of these various terms that we use now, largely because of social media and all the platforms in social media that are communal type terms. And yet, what do we mean by them? Are we gathering around content? Are we gathering around a feeling? Are we gathering around like a shared experience in what I might call a not superficial, but a shared experience in kind of the world of social reality, which is, I think, different than a shared experience in an embodied sort of sense, in having a conversation over a meal at a table or going through something together, like going on a trip together or going camping together. That shared experience is different, I think, than the shared experience of listening to a podcast from our various locations. And yet, I do think it's really important for us to expand what we mean by community, because we live in different times
Absolutely.
now, and expand what we mean by presence. Can I be present with somebody online or in a Zoom call? Like, is that presence in the same way as being in the same room with our embodied selves connecting? I mean, these are big questions, but I think that we do need to have that conversation. And then what role does responsibility play in all of these various communities? So Jeff, I really appreciate your nuancing this a little bit, because it can be sort of easy to say, my family, my parents, my kids, these are very visceral responsibilities in this give and take relationship of communal life. But then what about the larger, and using a Bible phrase, what does it mean to be our brothers and sisters keepers? in the largest sense possible, which is part of what Casey was talking about. And to be a brother or sister's keeper, it means you're responsible. You take responsibility on for that person, hoping that when you are in some sort of need, somebody will take responsibility for you.
But I also think but responsibility is in the eye of the beholder. For someone who might be suffering from social anxiety or whatever, they might come from a perspective, I'm putting a lot of responsibility into this. Just by showing up once and not talking to someone, that's huge. And recognizing, like, well, what is even responsibility and giving mean in a communal situation? Because it's easy to diminish the virtual space. It's easy to dismiss it. Well, it's not real connection. It's fake connection. But, you know, we have a whole generation of people that's the only, not the only, but the most significant and meaningful connection that they've had in their lives is through those relationships that they've developed with someone that they may have never seen or been with in the same room. And I also think in terms of like the idea of responsibility and burden and work and give and take, like, you know, working with the two of you at your church and recently encountering a lot of people who cannot see and listening to their stories about how trying to be a part of church communities made them feel like they were a burden, made them feel like it was too much work to fully bring you into the community. So it was like you conform or find somewhere else. And I think that those instances, especially people who are, you know, who might be disabled and how they're interacting and then how we determine that. Because I know that around community, we use a lot of flowery spiritual language. Around inclusivity, we used a lot of flowery spiritual language. But there is a lot of work that goes into that. And I just struggle with the word responsibility because it's such a present reality. Because of the world that we live in and the culture we live in America, it's so easy to like attach certain things to responsibility, like effort and money, and like, here's what real responsibility is. And I don't know. It's just, it's such a muddy thing.
Well, those are really good points, Jeff. And I think healthy community recognizes, again, development and circumstance. And, you know, the people you were talking about who don't have sight, you know, who are blind, it's been a real learning process for us. And, you know, their presence and their gifts are meaningful. And so we learned. We're like, tell us, you know, teach us what to do, rather than being like, well, that's too much trouble or whatever. And, you know, so fortunately that community is one that is eager to learn and change. So, you know, it is.
You're talking about the church.
The church, the
Okay.
church in this case, in this
Okay.
instance. But all communities, like I've seen that in some of my extended family when a person isn't doing so well. You know, there's the rallying around, all right, it's time for us all to step up, go by and visit, take some meals, whatever it may be. And you see that replicated in all kinds of settings. And you know, also a recognition, a really healthy community might realize, like you're saying, Jeff, maybe all that person is going to be able to do is open the door and receive from time to time. And that's their contribution. So as members of a community, that's part of what I think we're called into, is to be part of that discerning process, the process of equipping the organism.
I want us to be able to also speak to our own communal journeys a little bit. And so thinking about, and I'm so glad you brought the metaphor of organism into the space, because like we've been saying many times before, that nothing's really fixed, that it's all in process. And so communities themselves are very much in process all the time. People coming, giving what they can, what they have to give, and then other times not having those things to give. And so others have to step in, lean in and give, and so on, that give and take. So with community as organism, if you would speak to a little bit about your own journey with community, like what was it like to leave community or to move in and out of community? How did you find community when you felt alone, or did you? We'll start with those questions first.
Another easy list.
Well, we're thinking about that. I want to kind of take us back to this idea of responsibility, because I think it's easier for us to nuance this and invite our listeners to think about us being a part of a larger global community, right?
Yeah.
It's so much easier to go there because it then doesn't become tangible.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as Jeff was saying, like, he's struggling with this word responsible. How are you responsible when you may feel like there's nothing you bring to the community or whatever, that you might not have a lot to offer? I want to speak to this idea, and it's related to what you've just asked, Bonnie. If you do not feel responsible to the community, then what is the point? Then it is not a community that you belong to. And if they do not feel responsible to you, if they're not willing to find ways to bring you in. I had a senior recently say, I feel like all of the ways in which I used to give to the community, I can no longer do. And now I am meaningless. And I said, but you love to write cards, don't you? Oh, well, I do. I sure love to write. What if I bought you 150 postcards, and brought stamps? Would you be willing to write a card to every person on our roster? Well, I could certainly do that. I'm committed. The community is committed to finding a way to make you feel committed. There's responsibility there, right? And I think that that's sort of when we come into the second phase of the conversation around leaving a community. I think the first question you have to ask is, do I still feel any obligation here? Do they feel obligation to me? Or have they left me to my own sinful devices or whatever? There is that give and that take that we talked about earlier. And responsibility, we could replace it with commitment or value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there commitment to this? Do I feel committed to the cause, the connection? Do I feel responsible for the flourishing of the community and myself a part of that? The co-flourishing, we might say. And if either of those are no longer a green light, if it doesn't feel like there's co-flourishing, then there has to be the ability to walk away.
Yeah.
And I know that was true for me. That's the question. What about you? And for me, it was, you cannot see me as a whole person. You do not value my opinion. You are not allowing me to consent to your prayers or not to consent to your terrible prayers, which means that you're not responsible for me. You do not have my best interest at heart. And so I have to step away and find spaces where that co-flourishing can happen, where I can be seen and valued as a whole person, where you feel responsible to my flourishing. I think that is an essential piece of this conversation.
Yeah. The arc that you were asking about, Bonnie, leaving is always painful, I think, even if leaving is necessary. That process of leaving, I think, is an eternal process. It's not something you do just because you no longer physically go to a place. The leaving takes forever. And that process of leaving is then intertwined with creating new community and new support systems. And, as Casey said, we've been burned before. We don't, we're reticent to trust. But I think ultimately, and then connecting this to what Jeff was saying, ultimately, we need community to be okay. As humans, we're resilient and creative. And so we're like, all right, let's find a way to create community. And sometimes it's the bowling league. Sometimes it's a podcast and fellow listeners. Sometimes it's bird watching. It's a long list. And sometimes it's faith community.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of along with that is that, the responsibility of leaving has to lay on the community itself. Like, it should be easy to leave a community. Not that you're not going to miss it or whatever, but it doesn't always have to end in, you no longer value me, I no longer value you. It doesn't always have to end in like, I can't be on board with this or I can't be on board with that. It can be something that we can flow in and out of depending upon the seasons of our life, the circumstances of our life. And I think that part of the power of a healthy community is one that holds its people loosely when they need to be held loosely and brings them in tight when they need a hug,
Yep.
And I don't think that many of us coming from church communities churches don't seem very well equipped to that. And I wonder if it's not just churches, but I think it's, going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, where communities are centered on things. If my community is centered on a book, that book ends, we have something in common, that's fine. But if my community is centered on like the fate of people of color in our community, or, this greater, grander work of, the churches that we work with in terms of social justice and all that kind of stuff, leaving feels like, well, I'm leaving this work and I'm not a good person. So I feel like, and I don't know if that means like in our lives we have like long-term communities and short-term communities, or all that kind of stuff. But I do think the marker of a healthy community is one that releases grace gracefully and says, hopefully you'll be back. If not, then through those processes, you have a connection of communities. So communities in community, which I think is even harder to balance and walk through and maneuver through.
I think that speaks to maturity also, right? I mean, it goes back to some of what we were talking about in the last episode around knowing oneself well and being able to acknowledge that there are places and spaces that you will be for a season. I mean, even saying that, I imagine, but it's true that there are people that you will walk with, communities that you will walk with for a lifetime. And then there are other spaces and places that and people that you will not. So being able to hold things lightly is a sign of maturity. Even people who've left my church, when we have left in disagreement, I've said, I would still love for you to come one Sunday and let us pray for you and send you out in peace so that you know that there is no ill will here. Rarely do they take me up on that, but I mean it when I say it, because I don't ever want people to feel like in my personal life and in my work life that you are beholden to whatever it is, right? We know the definition of cult, right? The definition is you don't get to leave. You can't leave. We don't want people to feel bound to these things. And so, as you're saying, Jeff, I agree. I think it is important for us to acknowledge that there's the ebb and flow of life and relationships change. Being a mature person or a mature system is to be able to hold these things lightly and value the time that you do get with them.
Yeah, I appreciate all of that, but I want to push back on it a little bit because I think it's also a byproduct of whiteness to sort of believe that we can move in and out of community and not invest to a point where we deeply belong. And I know there's various communities, and Jeff, like your communities within communities is true. Like there are some communities that are really close around us, and we may describe those communities as communities that we belong to, belong with, and maybe belonging and responsibility. There's some correlation between those two words. And I'm going to speak to the experience of leaving community that I still belong to and that I'm in. And that's where it gets really painful and difficult and complicated. I inherited my religious tradition from my great-great-grandparents on down to me. So that's the community that I'm going to speak to. I mean, there's a culture around that tradition. There's a food culture. There's a language culture. There's a ritual culture. And I experienced within this community that I didn't feel like I could flourish in it. And that when myself woke up truly and was like, this community can't hold you in the ways that you need to be held in order to really be true to who you are. And so I left, but I still haven't left the belonging piece. And I know that's not true. I don't think it's true really of, maybe your corner church or whatever, because I think it's different when you are raised in more of a sectarian folk culture tradition, like say the Amish or something like that, as compared to just like we drove into town and found a church and that's a church that we belong to. And there's more choice involved, I guess, in how much you'll invest in that community versus you have to. This is who you are. This is your identity. So I'm just trying to add all the layers of this experience of community and belonging and responsibility. And some of us have to leave communities that we deeply belong to, but they come with us in our leaving. And so then a lot of our work spiritually in with the self, but then also with community, is to figure out how in the coming with us, we incorporate them in ways that are going to actually contribute to our well-being instead of to our harm. And that's a huge journey that feels like it doesn't end. But I want to resist this idea that we are able to just sort of step in and out gracefully. I don't know if that's true or if it's helpful. And I'm happy to be disagreed with, but.
Well, I think that, as the token white male in this, you saying that and hearing what you're saying in regards to your experience with Adventism, I think that there's a lot of truth there. And I suppose that it is super easy for me to say and maneuver in and out of different communities when I know that I have the safety net of the larger cultural community. So I think that there's, on reflection, a lot of truth to that in calling out whiteness specifically. I have to sit with that for a while.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Jeff. And I also think that, there's truth to what you're saying too. And I think the nesting community within community, some communities are designed to be moved in and out of. They're temporary. And we may be able to speak to those communities in our process of leaving. We found this community, we sort of tried it out, experimented, and then was like, no, not quite. And then moved into a new community. I think that urgency within us to be part of community is what we really want, is to belong. We want to belong to a people, and we want people to belong to us.
Responsibility.
Yeah, but I mean, like, deep, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm just saying, I guess my criticism of using whiteness as a way to criticize, it may not just be whiteness. It may also be maleness or masculinity may be part of it too, which, is that emotional expression of you're mine and I'm yours. Like, and how difficult that is to say, except to very, very few intimately close people, and how that's kind of sad. And maybe this whole journey with leaving community and community, I don't know. We can take this out, but
no, I feel like we're going, and I mean, there's so many layers to this. I feel like, first of all, I want to apologize because I feel like every turning point of this conversation, I've just, muddied the water a little bit and taken us away, of course. Okay. So I will continue in that tradition to say that I've also, honestly, outside of this group right here, people at the table, I've not been a part of a community whose, I don't want to say central identity, but one of the main focuses of the community is a shared trauma, right? Like, all of us are coming out of the shared trauma of coming out of some sort of shared fundamental controlling religious system to varying degrees, as we've discussed throughout the entirety of our time together in this show. But outside of this, none of my communities have been based off of shared trauma, any kind of trauma, cultural trauma, anything like that. And I think that also speaks to whiteness, like, outside of just the cultural net of wherever I go, I'm not going to be looked at twice. So, I mean, like I said, there's a lot to chew on there, and I need to sit with that for a while.
Who knew this was going to be so hard to talk about? Did everybody get a chance to speak to the journey?
I think I did. Maybe, this might be my closing thought here, but the notion of belonging has a deepness to it that includes responsibility, but is beyond responsibility.
Yeah.
And I like what that's communicating, because in a way, it feels like it inherently allows for transformation without excommunication. And I think that's something we all need to be as fully developed as we can in this lifetime.
I hear your invitation for reintegration, Bonnie. I think it's really hard for a lot of us, right? And some people might hear that like, go back to your abuser, and that's not what we're saying.
No, not
right?
at all.
No.
Mm-mm.
And I think that, one of the things that we were talking about before we jumped on here was the work that I've done with some evangelical colleges, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod College in Southern California, and being able to go back onto those campuses, not welcomed, by the way, with open arms, and to speak to those young people, to speak to ears who need to hear. And that work is not easy. I mean, it oftentimes makes me like feel very tired and sometimes a little depressed after, right? Because it evokes in me so much. But the ability to return, because I know the language, because that is the culture that I was embedded in, it gives me authority to speak in a way that someone without this experience would never be able to be heard, would never be able to be received. And I think that that's sort of the invitation that I'm hearing from you, is that even though you may have to leave these communities at some level, they never are far from you. In terms of the way you see the world, in terms of the way you navigate it, how do you honor some of that story by being able to integrate it in a way that is transformative, is I think what I hear you saying, and at least inviting us into. I think that would be my final thought, right? Is find a way, whether that be through finding other communities like intersections or whatever that allow you the ability to process so that you might get some distance and clarity, right? To see and to reintegrate, or to scorch the earth if that's what you need to do. But the truth is, it'll never be far from you. It will always live in you in some way. And so you can allow it to rot in you, or you can use it as fertilizer for the next part of your journey in the way you reintegrate into community.
Yeah, and you carry it into the other communities that you're a part of. And that's really well said, Casey. And I do think Intersections, which is a program that we all developed to help people process their experience of leaving evangelical and fundamentalism. And we're excited to be able to offer that more often. And we have one coming up in the winter, starting in February. So that once the self is alive and well, as, of course, always as well as it can be in the moment, then the community isn't the same. Like, you're not absorbed by the community, and that you can belong to something as an individual in relationship with all these others. But you're not them, and they're not you. You're connected. And so you can come in and come out in ways that are maybe less harmful, but it takes so much work. So much work. Wow. We promised beyond the binary of deconstruction and reconstruction. And we also sort of made a pact between us that we were going to go into places that we felt like other people in conversations about this deconstruction and reconstruction process weren't going into. And we obviously, as you heard, if you listened to this series, have heard that some of those places are hard to reach with language. So we really also want to hear from you and hear what language you put to your experience. We can just learn from one another in community as we all continue our process. So let us know what you think. To add your voice to this particular conversation, comment on the show notes at irenicast.com/188. In the show notes, you'll find relevant links and a complete list of all the ways you can add your voice to this conversation. And if you haven't already, please consider joining our email list. By joining our email list, you will be updated on all things Irenicast, including our next intersection session that will be taking place on Thursdays, February 3rd through March 10th at 7 p.m. Pacific time. You can find a link to subscribe in the show notes at irenicast.com/188. And we do hope that you will join that email list. So on the other side of the music, we will play 2 truths and a lie. Welcome back to our game. We are going to...
Way to hype it up, Bonnie. Get people excited.
We are playing 2 truths and a lie, a nice old classic standby, something that youth pastors know how to play all the time. And this time it's related to our topic of community. So each of us will share 2 communities that we actually have belonged to or in, and 1 community that we haven't. And we will try to guess which one is the lie, the false community.
This should be interesting.
Yeah, it should be interesting. So I'm going to pull a Jeff and go to my right. Casey's sitting on my right-hand side, so we'll start with you, Casey.
Bonnie, I just need to know in the end, can I sit at your right hand?
Always, always.
So, happy to sit here. All right, here we go. Here are the 3. Youth with a Mission, YWAM. Maybe some of you remember YWAM, Youth with a Mission. The Sacramento Leather Community. And the Young Republicans.
Ooh.
I'm going to say YWAM is a lie. I don't think you actually belonged to that group.
Okay.
I think you went there.
Okay.
I'm still stuck on the leather community. Like, that can mean a lot of things. Like, you were, wrangling cows, or you in at S&M, or... Okay, here we go. I got a nod. For those of you that are listening, I got a nod when I said that part. Just, since this isn't a visual
It's not
medium.
Cowboys, Jeff.
Yeah.
Well, it could be.
I mean, chaps are a thing.
Yeah,
but...
I guess, right, sure.
Yeah.
Leather's used for a lot of things. Well, I don't see like a leather mask hanging up in your office. So, I think, Rajiv, that's some sound logic. I'm going to go with YWAM as well. Because I feel like you were there with the Republican thing, but I don't remember YWAM and Lutheran churches being super connected. But I could be wrong. But I'm going to go with YWAM for the same reasons that Rajiv said.
This is tough. I'm going to say that you may have had Republican leanings, but that you never joined the Young Republicans Club. So
I was a part of the Young Republicans, and I would never, ever, ever step foot on YWAM's campus. But I had other evangelical youth missions organizations I was a part of, but not YWAM. They were actually down the street from where I was, but they're atrocious as well. The leather community, the way I'm connected to them was 3 years ago when I was Grand Marshal of Sacramento Pride Parade. The queen of the leather community in Sacramento, I don't know what they call her, but she was one of the other grand marshals, and so she invited me to like a big ceremony they were having. And so, are you ready for my joke of the day? I get there, they welcome everyone, and they, Pastor Casey, we're so glad you're here. And I said, yes, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad that we all wear collars in different forms. Get it? Clergy
Nice.
collars.
Yes,
Haha.
nice.
Okay. I
See,
try.
We love these
So
games.
I got it right.
Yeah, you got it
So
right.
that's a point for me.
Yeah.
All right.
A point for
Riding
me.
off Rajiv's coattails. I will take that point as well.
All right. So here's mine. Way back in the day, Rush Limbaugh started calling feminists feminazis. And in response to that, and in objection to Rush Limbaugh in total, a group called the Feminazis formed in Washington, D.C., and I joined them.
Are you giving us you're supposed to give us 3 communities?
That's one. The next community,
We're
getting
supposed to
stories
guess.
so
for
that's the Feminazis. The next community
Okay.
is the Trotsky Society, which is a socialist political group that formed during the first Gulf War and worked to bring about charges of war crimes against President Bush. And the third community was amongst a group of friends who founded Grace Place and a homeless shelter. So those are the three communities.
Oh, okay.
The Feminazis, the Trotsky Society, and Grace Place.
You started it in such a way that I felt like we were sitting down at a campfire and you were telling like once upon a time.
Right.
I appreciate the historical context. I really do.
I'm going to go with the Trotsky Society. Because I feel like you were like your conversion to the light was not in the early 90s. So I'm going to go with Trotsky Society.
As the lie.
As the lie. That's right.
I think you're trying to fool us with the feminazis thing because it seems to be on the surface right down your wheelhouse with your work with masculinity. And it's kind of like, you openly calling yourself a feminist. And I feel like it's a swerve to like, well, of course, if this is who I am now, that's who I used to be. So I'm going to go with that one and I don't think that they ever formally organized. So I'm going to go with that.
Yeah, me too. That you weren't part of the feminazis. You may have heard about the feminazis if there even was such a thing, but that you weren't part of it.
Right.
So that's correct. But I was part of the feminazis. It was just me and my friend Carla.
Oh, you made up your own little club?
And we never actually formed a society. But I was like assigned member of the Trotsky Society, and we tried to bring about war crimes on the Persian Gulf. And Bonnie and I actually were two of the members of what became Grace Place, that homeless shelter.
Yeah. So
another giveaway was the longer narrative connected to that first one.
Yeah,
you're kind of compensating.
True.
So Jeff is winning?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's just say
it's your turn,
I've only
Jeff.
gone once though, so
It's your turn, Jeff.
Okay. So a ballroom dancing club, a ska band, and a sewing club.
Oh my gosh.
Ballroom dancing club.
See, I feel like in a previous episode you mentioned something about dancing, and I can't remember if it's that you don't like dancing or that you do like dancing. That's where I'm. So I'm going to go with the sewing club. I'm going to say you are not in the sewing club.
This is tough.
I have never seen any of your attempted moves. So I feel like if you were a member of the ballroom dancing club, we'd see a shuffle sometime.
A shuffle somewhere. Yeah,
and I've
that's
just
a good
never
point.
seen one, so I'm going to go with that one.
That's the lie. Okay.
I think it's the ska band. And the reason is because I think that maybe somehow you talked into doing the ballroom dancing thing and the sewing club, but you really want to be part of a ska band, and that's the one thing.
I get that. Yeah,
that you haven't
that
done
was
yet.
my second choice.
I think
And
Jeff
you're
needs
throwing-
the
you're
beanie and the
projecting it
tight
into the
jeans.
future.
The guitar playing is what I was like,
So-
he probably for like maybe 10 minutes.
What's the
All right.
answer?
So a long time ago, after I first met my girlfriend, now wife, her dad was a pastor of a church, and we used to just hang out at the church building all night. So we would...
Did you?
Yes. Oh, yeah. We would play this game called pew racing, where we'd start at the back of the church, and then we have to crawl under the pews to the front of the church. And then that became the impetus for the name of my ska band, the Pew Racers.
Uh-huh.
So I was in a ska band.
You
but
were
I
in a
didn't-
ska band.
And I did not play
Da, da,
guitar.
da.
I played saxophone.
Oh.
Whoa.
So-
Uh-oh. The
That-
plot thickens.
The plot.
So there's that, but we never, like, it didn't last long, but it was still part of it. My cousin, when I was younger, started taking a dance class at a ballroom dancing club
Ah,
and
man.
encouraged my mom to enroll me, and I had to go. So for like a year of my life, I had to take ballroom dancing,
Wow.
and sewing is not something I've been a part of, although I want to learn to sew. So hopefully in the future that will no longer be a lie, but at this point
So
it
you
is.
got the right motivation, Bonnie,
Yeah, but wrong.
the wrong event.
event.
or activity.
You should come over. We could sew sometime. I love sewing.
I would show me,
Yeah.
please. Seriously.
Okay.
I would love that.
Yeah, Nick wants to start a whole club, a sewing club.
All right.
There
well
you
then,
go.
There you go.
He's making his own clothes now.
Yeah. he
future me, this will not be a lie.
is. All right. So here are mine: Horsewoman's Club, Mops, which back in the day was Mothers of Preschoolers, Christian group, and Macrame Club. These are like so old person. Because I am an old person. What can I say?
So Horsewoman Club, like women who like ride horses, or like women who are into the mythical creatures of is it centaurs? That's half person.
No, real horses.
No, real horses.
Yeah, real horses.
Okay, so
Horsewoman's Club, MOPS, Mothers of Preschoolers, that Christian group that's probably long gone.
No, it's still around.
Is it still around?
Oh, it's still around.
Okay, so sorry for those people who might still be out there doing that. And the Macrame Club, which is, macrame, making things with ropes.
I'm going with Horsewoman Club because no lady who I know that rides a horse calls her club the Horsewoman Club. So I'm going with
That's a good point. And I just like, for some reason, like the whole like horse culture just seems like
not.
I can't put you there.
Yeah.
I'm maybe I'm just wishful thinking, but I hope that that's the lie.
All right, I think it's MOPS. I'm pretty sure you were part of the Horsewomen's Club back in the day. The macrame thing back in the day. MOPS, you knew about it, but I don't think you were ever in it.
Yeah, you're right. The Horsewomen's Club thing was like just in our boarding school. So it wasn't a large culture, like broader culture thing. It was just on...
Whoa. Boarding school? What's going on?
Yeah.
I feel like
another episode. So, so we had horses and we had to like get up in the morning and work the farm and the whole thing. This is a whole part of the story that I thought has come out by now, but apparently it has not.
Know this.
I want pictures found of Bonnie riding a horse.
I feel like something's going to happen.
I loved horses
in your life, and you're going to have like a John Wick moment where you're going to like go into your basement and like pull out this old chest, and it's going to be your plaid skirt for boarding school and like your horse whip and hat.
Yeah, that's all in the chest for sure.
Oh my gosh.
So, and then macrame, again at the boarding school, learned how to do that. And there was like a club and that was fun.
Forgive my ignorance. What's macrame? Is it like a sewing thing or
it's
what
like
is it?
Using cords, like kind of rope to tie knots.
Cords and big fat beads.
To make, beads. You can tie beads. You can tie beads in there to make
like flower pot holders.
You weren't in the club. Just a minute. You make like hanging
and owls.
Plant hangers.
Okay, so the evolution of making.
Okay, you are not in the club. You don't get
in the club.
Okay, so all the girls in elementary school that are making friendship bracelets. This is like the next evolution of that.
This is like
Okay,
friendship bracelets. Like you can make belts. You can make like suspenders. You can make plant hangers.
Horse whips, saddles.
Horse whips.
Go nuts. Okay.
Totally.
All right.
Yeah, you should look it up. Google macrame. You'll be amazed. You'll probably want to join the club. But I tried. I was invited so many times to join MOPS, and I just never could sign the paper. Because you have to sign a paper, at least you used to have to, about beliefs and stuff before you join it.
Interesting. Wow.
There we go. Those are our fun communal stories. That and much more. So that will do it for this week. We just want to mention that Intersections is coming up Thursdays, February 3 to March 10, 2022. We're excited about it. We hope that you will join the email list at arenacast.com so that you can be informed of how to register. If you enjoy Arenacast and would like to join the work that we are doing, please consider donating to our PayPal link at arenacast.com/PayPal. We are committed to keeping the show free for listeners, but there are costs involved and your financial support helps. That's arenacast.com/PayPal. Arenacast is a nonprofit organization, so your donations are tax deductible. You can also support the show by simply making sure you follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts. And if the platform allows it, leave a rating and or review. So for this week, I'm Bonnie.
I'm Casey.
This is Rajiv.
And I'm Jeff.
Thanks for joining the conversation.